It is March in the year 180 AD. We are deep in the frozen frontier of Vindobona, near modern-day Vienna, a harsh military encampment resting at the absolute edge of the known Roman world. The man inside this leather tent commands 60 million people. He has spent his reign with access to every luxury in the Mediterranean, yet he is ending his life in a freezing outpost surrounded by mud and ice. This is Marcus Aurelius. His face reflects the weight of an office that has physically exhausted him, leaving him hollowed out by the responsibilities of the throne. He is dying. His health has finally broken after years of relentless pressure from the frontier and the streets of his own cities. That pressure began 15 years earlier, in 165 AD. Roman legions returning from the east carried a highly contagious pathogen that spread rapidly through the empire's trade routes and military camps. This infection map shows the spread of the Antonine Plague. By the time it subsided, the disease had claimed an estimated 5 to 10 million lives across the Eurasian landmass. The impact on the total legionary force was devastating. In crowded cities and military barracks, mortality rates reached up to 35%, stripping the empire of its primary defense. The physician Galen documented the symptoms with clinical precision. He described victims suffering from intense fevers, ulcerated throats, and black scabbing rashes that covered the entire body. The plague struck the emperor's inner circle with equal force. He lost his co-emperor, Lucius Verus, in 169 AD. By 175 AD, his wife Faustina had also died, likely succumbing to the lingering epidemic. The disease took more than just lives. It took his family, his most trusted partners, and his sense of imperial stability. With the legions weakened by disease, Rome's borders became porous. Germanic tribes seized the opportunity to cross the Danube, triggering a decade of brutal combat known as the Marcomannic Wars. Marcus spent his final 12 years on the Danube frontier. He personally directed the defense of the empire from these jagged, freezing cliffs. This was a war of constant vigilance. Tribes pushed across the frozen river throughout the winter, forcing him to live in mud and wear the heavy gray cloak of a common soldier. Surrounded by uncontrollable violence and loss, the emperor began to look inward for a way to maintain his composure. He began writing the meditations in his tent by candlelight. These were private entries, never meant for the public, written to remind himself how to remain rational in the face of chaos. There is a common misconception that Stoicism requires the total suppression of human emotion, but Marcus felt his grief deeply. He wept openly upon hearing a letter about an earthquake in Smyrna, and he was moved to tears by the suffering of plague victims. He turned to Stoic logic because his empathy was so intense. He needed a way to acknowledge his sorrow without allowing it to paralyze his judgment or his duty to the state. For Marcus, Stoicism acted as a stabilizer. It gave him the tools to feel the full weight of his losses while remaining a functional leader. By early 180 AD, we return to the military ruins at Vindobona. Marcus is 58, but the combined strain of 15 years of plague and frontier warfare has broken his health. His body is spent. Though the war is largely won, the plague still cycles through his camps. The ruler who stabilized the empire has finally run out of time. Having spent a lifetime managing the disillusion of the world around him, he now faced the disillusion of himself. His final spoken words were directed to his guards, a dismissal intended to protect them from his own infection. "Go to the rising sun, for I am setting." In the last entry of his journal, he compared life to a drama directed by nature. He wrote of a person complaining that they had only finished 3 acts of the play. His final lesson was one of acceptance. When nature calls you off the stage, do not argue for more time. Exit with the same grace that was shown to you when you arrived. Marcus was succeeded by his son, Commodus, a man whose reign would eventually unravel much of the stability his father had fought to preserve. The borders Marcus secured would eventually fall, but his private notes survived. a record of a man training himself to face the end of his world with equanimity. On March 17, 180 AD, the center of the Roman world is this freezing military camp at Vindobona, modern-day Vienna. The camp is silent, covered in a thick layer of late winter snow. Inside the imperial tent, the 58-year-old emperor is dying. His body is failing, likely succumbing to the same plague that has already decimated his legions. Physicians and high-ranking officers wait outside the tent. They understand the stakes of this moment. They are losing the last of the 5 good emperors. His death marks the literal end of the Pax Romana, a pivot from a century of stability towards an era of internal decay. The historian Cassius Dio records that Marcus Aurelius's final spoken words to his guards were a cryptic directive: "Go to the rising sun, for I am setting." This could have been a simple acceptance of a new day, or perhaps a Stoic metaphor for wisdom as sunlight. However, most historians believe it was a weary reference to his successor. Marcus faced a brutal choice. To prevent a civil war, he had to leave absolute power to his biological son, Commodus, an inexperienced youth who spent his life in the shadow of his father's wars. This decision ended the Roman tradition of adoptive succession, where emperors chose the most capable man for the job. Instead, Marcus chose the stability of a bloodline over the uncertainty of merit. The transition was jarring. While Marcus lived as a servant to the state, Commodus viewed the empire as his personal playground, eventually styling himself as a new Hercules. As these coins changed hands, the wealth and military might of Rome passed from a disciplined philosopher to an erratic, self-indulgent ruler. Cassius Dio lamented that after Marcus, the history of Rome descended from a kingdom of gold into one of iron and rust. The political legacy Marcus left behind was a tragedy of necessity. Marcus left behind a private journal, written in the dark corners of military camps and never intended for the public eye. In the final entries of this journal, which we now call the Meditations, he reminds himself that he has lived as a citizen in a great city. Whether for 5 years or 100, the laws of nature make no distinction. He uses the metaphor of an actor being dismissed from the stage. When the actor protests that he has only finished 3 acts, the director replies that in life, 3 acts are the whole drama. His final written instruction to himself was to accept his dismissal from life with grace, the same grace nature showed when it first invited him in. While the physical empire he left to Commodus began to crumble, this private inheritance survived. It transformed a dying warlord into an eternal philosopher. His final days demonstrate the practical core of Stoicism. The first lesson is Memento Mori, the recognition that you could leave life right now. For Marcus, this wasn't a morbid thought, but a call to action. While you're alive and able, be good. The second lesson frames death as a natural requirement of the universe. Marcus writes that if death were truly harmful, nature would have given us the ability to avoid it. Because it is universal, it is meant to be welcomed. He also points to the symmetry of time. He writes of the vastness of time before and after a human life, arguing that the period of non-existence after death is no more frightening than the silence before we were born. Finally, he views death as the end of the body's rule over the mind, when our breath and intellect return to the cosmos. Cassius Dio noted that despite the plague, the wars, and his heir's failure, Marcus Aurelius survived his own death through the strength of his character. The borders he defended vanished long ago. His legacy is the record of a man who, amidst a failing body and a collapsing empire, found a way to face the end with unbreakable grace.